you. I'm just going to record. So we're recording this now. And I only like to record the guest part because, as I said earlier, there's about 2 hours that we're together, and trying to condense that into a Google Drive sometimes can be a little tedious. So welcome, Peter. We are so happy you said yes to our invite, and we thank you right from the start. So,
well, I'm so glad you invited me, Lilly. It's fun to be here.
So is Luann going to join us on another computer? We'd love to have her.
Luann is, you'll understand this, she is an empath, and she has empathic stage fright.
Oh, no problem. We've been
She's listening in another room.
We understand that totally.
Right. So in the world of fairies and elves, we have these kind of different levels of consciousness. And I've learned for many years with Luann, she lives on those other levels. The ones I wish I was privy to, but you know.
So, Peter, today we've got a group of people from Canada, and we've got them from the East Coast in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, all the way to Winnipeg today. Yeah, so we're really happy that you could join us, and we're happy that everybody is that's online. So I'll get you, most of you are unmuted, but in the meantime, I'll get you to mute until we have the question answer period, or if there's anything that you want to bring up, just put your hand up and let me know. So, Peter, I already introduced them. Excuse me, Mars is in my throat. Pay attention. Mars is in my throat. Hold on a minute.
That's my planet.
That's your planet. Yeah, this is where Mars resides, right? So I was just explaining to them about your books that you've done. And one of the things I thought we would, because I explained to everybody to expect nothing and everything is a bonus. I know that when I originally spoke to you, we were going to be talking about sacred journaling or how you got into writing and where that took you. But then your email to me the other day about something that you're working on now really caught my ear and my heart and every sense in my being. And I thought, let's get Peter to run with whatever he would wish to talk about. However, saying that, hey, Linda, having said that, there was a question that came up that I thought perhaps we could start there. And it was a question from Rondi, who wanted to know what makes a writer a ghostwriter, why you went into ghostwriting first. And I replied that I think you have the Hermit, right? Do you have the Hermit?
I do. I have the Hermit in my house of work, of occupation. So that's one good reason. I don't know what that was. That's one good reason. But I have to say that, first of all, I did not begin as a ghostwriter. I began writing my own books about, my first book was a humor book about the movie This Is Spinal Tap. I did a sort of comedy book about that because I was into the music world at that time. And also, my first kind of more normal book was called Once a Catholic, and it was a series of profiles I did of present and former Catholics, some famous, some not so, people like Marty Scorsese and Frank Zappa and Eugene McCarthy and a whole bunch of interesting people. Mary Gordon, Robert Stone, the novelists, and so on. So, yeah, and then it turned out that my agent was also the agent for Larry King, the talk show host, recently passed over, and asked me if I would be interested in helping him write a book that he was under contract to write. And it was either, he just couldn't do it. So he would have either had to give up the advance or hire me. So I went up and spent a weekend with Larry and found out he was a fabulous personality, a lot of fun, and that became Tell It to the King. And then, the next year I got hired by Frank Zappa, who I had interviewed for my Catholic book. He liked me, go along with me, and wanted me to help him write his autobiography, which came to be called The Real Frank Zappa Book, because he felt that none of the other books about him out there were accurate. And so that was a blast. Well, in some ways, I had recently quit smoking, and Frank was a chain smoker. He was rehearsing his band all day, so we worked from midnight till 6 a.m. And that was fun. And I actually I'll just do a quick story that I was going to tell to open if I was going to talk about journaling, which is that when I first came in contact with Carolyn Mace, I really didn't know that much about her, but my an agent that I worked with was also her publisher, her editor. And so she put us together, and Carolyn just called me one day and to see if we could work together. And the first thing she said is, "Where are you? Where are you right now?" And I said, "Well, I'm in my home office." "What do you mean?" She said, "Because I'm getting a really strong monk vibe." And I kind of knew about archetypes because I had written my book, The Joy of Sex, had a chapter on a section on the New Age, and Carl Jung and archetypes were in there. So, but I said, why do you say that? She said, "Well, describe your office." And, I had my computer, and I had a cabinet with a statue of the Blessed Mother and the Sacred Heart of Jesus. And then I also had a picture of a Tibetan Lama who I was following at the time. And she said, "Well, that sounds like a monk's cell to me." So that was how that came up. And then about a couple of years ago, I had another reading. I had asked Carolyn to give me a life reading. But I had a reading last year with a woman who accesses the Akashic Record, which you may all know of. And she, according to the record keepers, they said I had several lives as a scribe, a monk scribe working in scriptoria in different monasteries in Europe and in Tibet. And that was something that I did, copying manuscripts and translating them and so on. And that was a real enlightenment for me. As I journaled about that, I realized that, in fact, I had always had this kind of doubt about my career, because when you want to be a writer, you want to write books on your own name, and it's not the fame and fortune thing so much as it is simply self-expression and getting who you are out there and sharing that with the world. So why was I writing other people's books? And I mean, wonderful people like Carolyn and so on. But I realized that I was carrying on something that I had done in previous lifetimes, which was working with people to continue their stories, in a sense, to copy the manuscripts. So I came to feel a lot more at peace with what I was doing and the value of it, and that I was helping people in that way. So that's that story.
Peter, I just have a quick question for you. Do you have one of these? Because you're coming in, I'm getting a few people saying that it's up and down. I do. Muffled. Just put that in for a moment and see if it works. When I talk without mine, is it muffled? No.
I hear you fine.
Yeah. Okay. Just try it, Peter, and see what happens. Do you want to just say something, Peter?
Oh, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
That's better. Is that better? That's a lot better. Thank
you. Okay. Yeah, I'm hearing you through my earpods.
No problem. We're all getting used to technology.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. I would hate. I hate it when I can't hear what people are saying.
Yeah, it was kind of muffled, but we got the drift of it. So, Peter, what I'd like to, so you also ghostwrite for, it was a Dan Ross?
Ron Roth.
Right. And is there not a story between you and John Lennon and Yoko? Or did I dream that?
Yeah. No. Well, there's quite a few stories. Going back in time again. One of my favorite novels is The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. But going back to 1980, I was working as a music editor and journalist at the Soho News in Manhattan, at the height of the music scene there. I mean, I was a jazz reviewer at first, but because, I could edit, because I was a good scribe, they made me the music editor. Anyway, in 1980, in October, Lennon and Ono did an album called Double Fantasy, which was John Lennon's return to recording, but it was remarkable in a number of ways. They alternated songs on the album. It was the first time that had ever been done between two artists, not singing together, but singing separately, and the songs spoke to each other. So the part of the deal was I said I just wanted to interview Yoko. I didn't want to interview John because they were not giving dual interviews. So she agreed, and we spent a month off and on, and went up to the Dakota and hung out in the White Room, and had a wonderful time. She's a brilliant person, and I really enjoyed speaking with her. The interview came out on December 3rd. It hit the stands. We were a week late, and there was a photo of Yoko on the cover, and it was called Yoko Only, was the headline, sort of a play on words. And she called me the next day and said, "Oh, John really loved your story." Actually, it was 2 days later. She called me at 1 a.m. and said, "We're in the studio. We'd love you. John wants to meet you. Would you come up?" And I said, "Sure, I'll hop in a cab." And I went up there, and I spent 4 or 5 hours with the two of them. But mostly it was John and me sitting in the control room, because Yoko was dubbing vocal tracks for what became her first #1 hit, Walking on Thin Ice. Became a big dance club hit. Anyway, that was, the third. The next day she called me at my office and said, "Oh, John really liked you. We're going on a world tour, and we would like you to come and be the journalist to sort of cover the tour." And I thought, wow, this is great. And then, sadly, 3 days later, I heard about his assassination. And so I stayed in touch with Yoko. We remained friends, but the tour obviously never came about.
Interesting.
I write about this on my website, actually.
Yes. Thank you, Peter. It's interesting to get to know a little bit about your background, because what I'm really hoping today that we're going to spend time on is your next project and what interests you today. Because you know me, I'm always about just for today. However, before we get into that, I know that we have a few people that would like to be writers here, or they do a lot of journaling. Is there one or two pieces of advice that you would give us? And then if anybody has a question regarding that, now is the time to have your question ready. And then I want to get into what you're doing next, if that's okay. So what would be your #1 advice to anybody that's getting ready to write a book?
Okay, well, there are two separate topics, writing a book and journaling.
Okay.
And they're totally different. I always tell people, when you're journaling, don't worry about your writing style. Don't worry about grammar, syntax, spelling, any of those things. It doesn't matter. Your journal is a private conversation between you and the divine, or all that is, however you conceive of the divine dimension. And nobody else has to read it. In fact, if you have people in the house, relatives, friends, spouses, children, parents, keep it in a password protected file, put it in a locked drawer. You don't have to share that with anyone. And you should never write in a journal as if someone's looking over your shoulder, because that's a horrifying thing. I can't work that way, even though I worked as an editor in newsrooms and we were always collaborating. I always hated it when somebody was standing there and, asking me, "Oh yeah, no, change that. No, get away." So that's journaling. And I've taught this online. I stopped teaching it because I'm so busy co-authoring books and being a scribe. But that's my main piece of advice. Really let it be who you are. Don't, even think twice about the style, spelling, grammar, syntax, any of that stuff. I learned all that in grammar school from the lovely Dominican nuns, and it just haunted me for life. But at least I learned that that's when you're writing a book. That's a different story. If you want to write a book, that's a much more complex and long, drawn out process. You should begin by just writing what comes to you and writing every day or almost every day. It's like journaling. For it to work, you need to do it constantly. You need to read other books, read books that inspire you, and decide your identity, your field. You know, what are you going to write about? When I started writing, yes, it's true. My first book was a humorous book about music and sort of a satire of heavy metal. And if you've ever seen the movie Spinal Tap, you know what I'm talking about. It's pretty hilarious. But the fact is, I liked interviewing people, which is something I did as a jazz writer, interviewing jazz musicians and hanging out with them. And it was great, great fun. So I developed that skill of interviewing. And in my first book after the Spinal Tap book, Once a Catholic, I simply contacted as many, prominent Catholics and exes as I could and interviewed them. And I created a profile based on the interview, sometimes called oral history, but I did more than that. I wrote about them as well as quoting them at length. And so that was my passion because I grew up Catholic. And although I was torn because I was drawn to the mystical aspect of the religion. I liked sitting in the church alone and communing with God or whoever I imagined that divine essence to be. But at the same time, I had the nuns every day beating the crap out of me and telling me to, sit this way and sit that way. And I know that I don't judge them now. I know that, in fact, the women religious of America did an extraordinary job running these school systems, really without input from men for the most part. It's one of the untold stories. Unfortunately, though, they were also very conservative and very, anti-individual freedom. If you expressed yourself by writing on your desk or talking to your neighbor, you got in a lot of trouble. So, but that's how I started, and I went from there. And then I followed that into the spiritual dimension. I started practicing and studying other spiritual traditions besides Catholicism, which I lost faith in because of their support for the war in Vietnam, which was going on at that time when I was in high school. And so I joined a group called Eckankar, which is an American religious sect that focused on dream work. And they taught me to keep a dream journal. And that was also how I began being interested in journaling, to write down your dreams every night. There are a couple of great books if you're interested in that. I never wrote a book on that subject, but Patricia Garfield wrote a wonderful book called Creative Dreaming. And then there was another book, Lucid Dreaming, whose author's name evades my memory, but will probably come to me an hour from now.
Thank you for that. So with the work that you're doing and with your own writing, are you now offering any courses on that, on a writing workshop like you normally would have done in the past?
No, I work one-on-one with people.
Okay.
If you're interested in that, it's on an hourly basis, and you can go on my website and there's a tab at top that says consultation. And, I also give archetypal readings if you're interested in that, based on Caroline's method of sacred contracts and archetypes. But yes, I do. I mean, there are steps you need to take. You need to, if you seriously want to write a nonfiction book and get it published by a commercial publisher, you need to write a proposal, and that's a whole skill in itself. I used to teach that, just the art of writing proposals. I do that professionally now too, although, it's expensive because it takes a lot of time. It's very time and labor intensive, and I have to, put aside other things in order to do that. But I'm happy to work one-on-one over the phone and just give advice and that kind of thing.
That's
If you're
good.
writing a novel, that's a different story.
Okay, good. Thank you for that. Okay, so Anne
Yes.
has a question.
Hi,
Yes.
Anne.
Yeah, hi. Sorry, it took me a while to get on here properly. Yeah, so I've been writing poetry since I was about 15, 14
Uh-huh.
years old. And now I have grown-up daughters who went to Canterbury, which is the high school of the arts. And they tell me that every poem has to be rewritten 7 times and all this kind of stuff. And so I find that really discouraging. So when I look at my poetry, I feel like I call it crappy poetry because basically it's just an expression of myself in the moment.
Mhm.
Like I'll think of something. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, I'll write a poem. I call it a poem because it's short and it says what I want to say. And
Right.
then, then my girls will say things like, okay, mom, that's not great. So what I want to know is why you get from that to this place where they think it should be.
Well, I don't know Canterbury. I don't know what kind of school that is, if it's a religious school or an
No,
art
it's
school.
an art school of the arts, where they have dance and
Yeah.
writing.
Well, that's great. I wish I had gone to one instead of Catholic school, to be honest. But, those schools have their own kind of set frameworks for doing things, and they have teachers who get tenure by following their own framework, and that's what they preach. So I would say, first of all, I am a big believer in rewriting, not necessarily just poetry, but rewriting everything I do, I rewrite, because the first draft in writing, we call that the vomit draft. Just get it out there. Just, spew it out on the page so you have something, because there's, if you sit around waiting for the perfect phrasing to come to you, you'll never get anything done. You'll never get it down. So spew out that vomit draft, get it down, and then sit down and start and reread it, read it out loud. It's great to read your poetry out loud. I used to do that. I wrote for many years. And even your nonfiction writing, read it out loud. Don't do this with your journal. You don't need it. Remember, journal, creative writing, 2 different fields. Keep them separate. And it's a wonderful experience when, as you revise and rewrite what you're doing, you begin to see more deeply into it. You may see, Anne, I don't know if you're writing, kind of odes or lyrical poetry or whatever, but even with poetry, you can research, read Shelley, read some of these historical poems that the lake poets wrote, Shelley and Keats and Wordsworth, and go into the historical and the geographical backgrounds. You can always learn. So revising and rewriting is a valuable step. Why there should be 7 revisions? That's some creative writing teacher came up with that and decided that would help them keep their tenure. So I don't know. I'm sounding a little prejudiced here, but I never went to writing school. I never went to the Iowa workshop for creative writers. I learned, on the go. I learned as a journalist, and then I taught myself how to write books with people and about people. So I'm really not a good model, except I am a good model for doing it yourself. We live in a DIY universe now. So I'm all in support of doing things yourself and learning as you go. And it doesn't matter your age or your level of education. None of that matters. What matters is your passion, how much you love writing. I love words, okay? Physical words. I love learning new words. I love, having an OED, an Oxford English Dictionary, and looking up all of the historical roots of the words, what languages that they came from, and everything. You treat them as physical objects, just as if you were a sculptor, you work with clay or ceramics or metal, and you have this feel for the material. Okay, well, words are the medium that writers use. It's not a computer or a sheet of paper. The words themselves are our medium. So delve into words. Choose words. I even do crossword puzzles because I learn new words for them. And the Times has something called Spelling Bee, where they give you 7 letters and you have to make as many words from them as you can. And they have a list of acceptable words. And I often come up with a word that's not on their acceptable list. And then I have to tweet them and email them and say, what's going on here? So that's just, get into it. Use the doorway that is most amenable to you, that you feel the most passion for. You may not love words. You may think that's a silly waste of time. I would disagree, but find a way in. Find something. If you love art, write about art. If you love music, write about music. You don't have to be able to play music. You can write about your own experience. Memoir is very hot these days. It's been hot for the last 20 years. People kept saying, oh, the memoir thing is over. No, new memoirs keep coming out because people love to read about other people's life experiences.
You have to move your hand off your chin, honey. Can't hear you. There you go.
Okay.
Thank you, Peter. That's such great advice. And as you know, and I know Peter understands his language, look at what's in your 3rd, your 9th, and your 12th house. And remember we talked about it before, what your mantra is in your 11th house. So really work when we go to do the charism wheel the next time. That'll be a great, what do I want to write? It'll all be there for you. Yeah. But I love
good advice.
As Peter was saying, like the passion, whatever we have passion for. Are there any more questions about this? Because yes, okay, Rondi, because then I want to get into what Peter is writing about next. Rondi?
Hi, Rondi.
Hi, Peter. When you talked about journaling being so different from writing a book, my question, do people use their journals to sometimes write their books?
Well, sure, especially if you're writing a memoir, you can go back and cannibalize your journals. As a matter of fact, I don't know if any of you read Patti Smith, the punk rock musician, wrote a book several years ago called, what was it, Just Friends, about her relationship with Robert Mapplethorpe, the famous photographer. And it was a wonderful book. It's a wonderful story. Here she's having a romantic affair with this guy who turns out, he discovers he's gay and, doesn't quite know how to inform Patty, but it's a great story. But then I found out later that she had kept very specific journals all her life. So when she went back and wanted to write about, the first time she met Sam Shepard, when he was a drummer in a band called the Holy Motor Rounders, she had all that information down. She knew what she was doing every day of the week. She was a kid from New Jersey who came to New York in search of artistry. So yeah, that's definitely a good way. Date your journals and treat them like dream journals. In dream journals, what I recommend is you give each dream a name. I write down the date of the dream, and then in block letters, I write, riding the subway or whatever's going on in the dream. So you can do that with your journals if you like.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah.
Anybody else? Yes, Louise.
Hi, Louise. Unmute yourself, please.
Okay. Hi, Peter.
Yeah.
Hi. I'm not a person that does journaling, except I've done some of my dream journaling in the past. And as I work with people every day, I have a salon and I'm chatting with people. When I share some of the stories of just some of the things that have happened in over the years, they always go, why don't you write a book? So here's my question. How do you go from when I hear memoir, I've always thought if I did something like that, it would be memoir. But I've always thought, well, doesn't have to be, when it's a biography or memoir, doesn't it not have to be somebody that's well known for anybody to be interested? How do you go about creating interest, or do you put a pseudonym on people that you write about so that because
No,
it's all based on journaling? How does that even?
no, not necessarily, not at all. I mean, one of my favorite memoirs was written by Nick Flynn, who was not a prominent writer at the time. And the title of his memoir, which was, this isn't a family show. There are no kids around, but the title of his memoir was Another Bullshit Night in Suck City. He actually got this published. It became a really best-selling memoir. It was all about his father, who was a drunk and who left the house, and his mother was crazy, and she was always threatening to burn the house down to collect the insurance money. And he just wrote this from his heart. And when it came out, then he became a popular writer. He wrote more. He's teaching at the University of Texas at Austin now, but he wasn't at all known at the time. And I mean, I could go through, you could just Google best-selling memoirs and then see which one of them. A lot of the memoirs that are coming out recently by people, women particularly, who were involved in cults and sexual coercion cults like Nexium. I'm working with a woman who was in Yogi Bhajan's cult here in America. And so they're not well known. If your story is good, if you have an exciting story, and particularly if it's an inside view of a world that people would be interested in knowing more about. They may not care about you particularly, but they want to know the world you're writing about. So that needs to be specified, and that's where a bit of research can help. Go on Amazon and BarnesandNoble.com and look and search for the keywords for the subject that you're writing about. So you can say, I don't know, if you had to put your subject in 2 or 3 words or a sentence, what would it be? And search for that. See if there are other books on that. Then you need to work with either a writing coach or someone like me who can help you put that into proposal form. When you write a proposal, it's not always to sell it to a mainstream publisher. You might be interested in self-publishing. Self-publishing is realistic now, but you don't expect to sell more than a few hundred copies unless it catches on. There was another woman who wrote about being in this Yogi Bhajan cult. He was an Indian Sikh teacher who came here in the 60s and did a lot of evil things, but she was completely unknown. Her memoir, self-published, sold 5,000 copies. So that's not bad. That's actually really good for a self-published book. And then you build from there. But it's a lot of day labor. It's a lot of just sticking with it. If you have the time and you're in a position where you don't have to be working 8 hours a day, then that's great. That's a gift from God. So you can use that and see where it takes you. But really, zero in on who am I? What do I dream about? And I mean, nighttime dreams as well as daydreams. What comes up in my dream life? What's in my subconscious? And how does it express itself? What kinds, if you have, synchronicities, Jung said there are only 2 ways that our subconscious can communicate with us. One is through dreams and the other is through synchronicities. I'm sure if you're working with Lilly and Caroline's work, you know all about synchronicities, but live with them. Don't just say, oh, that was a wonderful synchron. What did it mean? Why that particular person and that thing and that book and that bird that I saw? What's the connection there? And what does it tell me about myself? So be curious. You really have to be curious. Even my love of words that I talked about, I was curious as hell about these words. I didn't know why. And I was in grammar school. I was a good speller, so they made me like the spelling bee contestant from my school. They trained me. It was horrible, but I learned a lot of words, and that was fun. So, does that answer your question at all?
It does, yes, thank you. So in fact, it's memoir would be quite different than biography. It's much more an exploration of the inside world around the topic of
It's
your
your
story.
state of it's also about your state of mind.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there are a lot of kind of famous quotes about this, but Nick Flynn, who I mentioned before, used to say, when you're writing nonfiction, you're writing the facts about people or about events. When you're writing memoir, you're writing about your perception of the facts. Now, as a nonfiction writer, I can write about my perceptions about what I'm writing about. Like, currently I'm working on this subject of alien and extraterrestrial spirituality. But so, yes, that will be very personal because that's not an objective field. There are some objective books that have been written about it that are very good, but a lot of it is speculative. But if I were writing about my Catholic school education, yeah, it would be my perception of that and how I perceived the nuns and what this taught me about myself and why. I worked with a medium. I love mediums. They're really, really incredibly gifted. And this woman specialized in connecting you with your spiritual guide. So I hired her to do a session. And she connected me with my guide. And I said, okay, answer me one thing. Why? And they said, oh, you've had many lives and blah, blah, blah. So why would I choose a life where I was going to go to parochial school and be tormented and just suffer this kind of, what I felt was injustice. You're always being punished for the wrong things. And he said, well, because you were going to become a writer and you needed to have a firsthand experience of injustice and of the fact that the world is not the way we would like it to be. And maybe your role as a writer is to show people how they can change that world. Now, I didn't go into political writing or investigative journaling. I highly respect people who do. I don't have the guts to do that. But I think that, I started writing about jazz. I was writing about very obscure musicians, giving them notice in the world, and then writing about world religions and about spiritual practices or other things that are, in fact, that's a good segue into what I'm going to be talking about today, because I was just reading an opinion piece in the Times this morning by Ross Douthat about how now there's there's a whole group of sort of professional atheists. They're called, four of them are known as the four atheists of the apocalypse, or the four horsemen of the new atheism. It's ridiculous. Douglas Dennett and Richard Dawkins, who wrote The God Delusion, and Sam Harris, and so on. And they've sort of made this thing that it's your moral duty to be an atheist because religion is superstition and it's oppressive, and there's the Spanish Inquisition and all this evil created by religion. What they don't mention is that, and they always say, oh, more people died in religious wars than all other wars put together, which is an absolute lie. It's not true. More people were killed by materialist reigns, the people who starved in Russia because of Stalin's approach to communism, in Mao's China, in Pol Pot's Cambodia, the Shining Path guerrillas in South America. Many, many millions of people died. These were completely atheistic, materialistic states. So these people are wrong, but they have, what this guy was saying was they've created a delusion of their own, the delusion that you have to be materialistic that you can't be spiritual because spirituality is false, because it's somehow a delusion. And I think it's the opposite. I think materialism is a vast delusion, and that people who they always get it wrong. For instance, one of the things I found when I started researching this whole subject of ETs or extraterrestrials and their communication, supposedly with Earth, is that they are almost every source that I've come across, they believe in a divine being, and they actually refer to the one infinite creator. Now, I don't know, for some reason, I think most people associate this whole subject of ETs and UFOs as some kind of, these aliens, they're so advanced materially, they're so advanced technologically, they would have no need for something like a superstitious belief in religion or in the spiritual world. Well, the opposite is true. They actually have a great comprehension of the fact that we have all been created by, they refer to the source as all that is. That's one name they give it, or the one infinite creator. They don't say God because it's been overused. But the fact is that they acknowledge that this is one vast spiritual community, that the way things are in the universe are way beyond anything we can imagine at this stage. And so I don't know if you want to get started on that, but that's
yes, please.
where I would
That's
go.
where I wanted to go next. That's where I wanted to go next. I just wanted to add, for what Louise and Anne was saying, and again, I know Peter can relate to this. When I was doing my own books, I found that an archetype took over. When I did 365 Ways to Power Up Your Life, it was the divine child. Madness, Addiction, and Love, it was my addict. The Mystic did Into the Heart of Bali. So you know yourself enough, Louise and Anne, that you know yourself and you know your patterns of behavior. So work with those. And then taking the advice that Peter has given you, what I've discovered is nobody will ever probably read my books, but the pieces of my puzzle of my life fell into place. And that's where I want Peter to go now, is as a collective, as human beings on our planet, and with all the writings that's coming out on ETs, etc., now the pieces of that puzzle are falling into place. So Peter, you can help us fit those pieces together. We'd be very grateful.
Great. Well, I'd love to do that. And again, this was a passion of mine. I wondered why I was reading all of these books and listening to all of these, podcasts and various other ways of learning about it, because I wasn't getting paid to do this. I had other work that I was doing. In fact, it was taking time away from research and writing that I needed to do. And I love the work I do. I'm working with a Harvard psychologist right now on a book about how to survive with anxiety, or how to thrive with anxiety. He actually believes anxiety is a great asset, and we should learn to acknowledge it, work with it, and don't try to blank it out. Don't deny it. Don't take medication to get rid of it, but use it. So the whole subject that Lilly just introduced is vast and, like the universe itself, ever expanding. So we know we live in an expanding universe. I live in an expanding universe of new knowledge about this subject every day, every week. There's something new. There are new books. And some of them I find utterly tedious and incredible in the literal sense, unbelievable, not credible. And others I am completely taken in by and taken over by, and I say I have to learn more about this. Now what I'm going to say is not going to be a linear presentation, because we live in a multi-dimensional universe. I'm sure some of you are probably familiar with the Seth books that came out in the 70s. Seth described himself as a spiritual being no longer connected with physical reality, no longer manifesting in spiritual reality, in physical reality, channeled by a brilliant woman named Jane Roberts, who lived in Elmira, New York, not far from where I live in Woodstock. And he said, we live in a multidimensional world. We are living several lives at once. We're just not aware of it. The ways that we get glimpses into these other lives, these other dimensions, one is through dreams. And, I used to think that my dreams were symbolic. I went through the whole Freudian and Jungian thing. Now I realize that I am in an alternate version of Woodstock in my dreams. I am in an alternate version of the career I had as a journalist, a writer, going to Midtown Manhattan to try to sell my stories and my books. But it's not symbolic. It's actually, I believe that some aspect of me is experiencing that. And then I wake up and I'm really excited. And I feel like, wow, that was great. I wish I could go back there, but I can't even remember most of it. So that's a little bit like what we're going to be talking about, which is more of a mosaic. I mean, I don't pretend to have answers. I have a lot of observations and a lot of questions. But the first question you might have is, why do I care? Why am I delving into this material, which is so prone to exaggeration? There's an interesting parallel between the UFO ET phenomenon now and go back 1 century, almost exactly, and a little more to the early 20th century, the 1900s and teens, and there was a fascination with what was called spiritualism, connecting with spirits of the dead, people who had passed on, and seances. And a lot of seances were proved to be fake because it was easy to fake them. However, many of them were absolutely genuine. And one of the great American psychologists of all times, William James, was a big fan of these seances. And he went and he worked with a couple of these mediums that were mostly women, just clear that women are more open to this. They have more openness to the other side. I know from living with Luann for 25 years that, she is privy to things that they don't come to me. So you have to be humble about this too. But he supported these mediums and their seances, and a lot of people thought it was all bunk. So we're having a similar thing now. There's a lot of questioning of it. But right now, there's also a lot of people are talking about disclosure, like the government is disclosing these accounts of aerial interactions with what used to be called UFOs, or unidentified flying objects. They're now calling them unidentified aerial phenomena, or UAPs, but it's the same thing. And all the government is willing to say is that these are not test planes, these are not secret vehicles that we're trying out, they're not Russian or Chinese vehicles, but they won't use the word alien. They won't say that they're being directed by extraterrestrials or anyone else. If you want a really good book on this subject, a reliable book by a journalist named Leslie Kean, it's spelled Kean, and if Lilly wants, I can put together a bibliography for you later and have it emailed to you. But Leslie Kean's book called UFOs, generals, pilots, and others, tell their stories. And she interviewed very credible people. These were all military people or experienced airline pilots who had experiences where not only did they see something, but it was also being tracked by radar on the ground, so that they were able to combine these two. I'm not saying this is the only verifiable information, but it's the most readily verifiable. And so, and by the way, Leslie Kean is a brilliant writer. She wrote a more recent book called Surviving Death, which was made into a series on Netflix that you might have seen. And she did research into near-death experience and out-of-body experience and after-death communications and so on, including a number of seances that she went to. Really enjoy her work. So she's very credible. And she did this book 10 years ago. And it did become a bestseller, but then was kind of forgotten about. I got drawn back into this whole field a couple of years ago when I discovered another piece of channeled writing called the Raw Contact. Now, this is much less well known than the Seth books, but again, it was channeled by a group of 3 people in the early 1980s, from 81 to 84. If you just Google Raw Contact or the raw material, they also have a website called llresearch.org. They're very generous and open with sharing their material. Most of it's available for free on their website. But anyway, there were 2 men and a woman. The woman, of course, was the channel, and they made contact with this entity called Ra, who said that Ra was not an individual. It was a social memory complex, that was Ra's term, consisting of 6.5 million separate entities speaking as one. Now, I mean, if you can conceptualize that, then, or if you try to conceptualize that, you'll see the difficulty of all of this material. How do we conceive of ourselves as individual beings and yet perfectly content to be 1 in 6.5 million speaking with one voice? That seems to go against everything that we've been raised to believe in this country, including rugged individualism, which, as we can see, doesn't work. There's a reason why we have a messed up capitalistic system and a messed up healthcare system. It's because we believe in doing everything ourselves. So maybe Ra is onto something. If I could just comprehend how I could share my unique being with 6 million other people and all speak with one voice. I can't, but I was fascinated by it. And when I started reading their books, there were actually 4 books that they published. They're now available as one book in 4 volumes. I was just amazed at the level of insight, of spiritual insight that they had. They basically said that we are working in what they call 7 densities. Now, we say usually dimensions, but I found since that, even though it wasn't a popular book, that word density has gotten into the New Age language, and we speak about densities. The first density being earth and minerals and plants, the second density being animals, and the third density being us, humans, Homo sapiens, sapiens. And how did we get there? Was it evolution? I mean, was Darwin right that these things happened over millions and millions of years with minuscule changes a little bit at a time? Or was there maybe some intervention along the way? Now, what Ra said is that we are right now in a position where we're preparing for what it calls harvest. In other words, that there will be an elevation to, perhaps for a number of humans on Earth at this time, to the 4th dimension. The 4th dimension, the 3rd dimension, intelligence is the ruling phenomenon, or the ruling state of consciousness. It's intelligence, self-awareness. That's humanity. The 4th density, love, becomes the driving force. This sounds like a song from from Hair, the Age of Aquarius, but whoever wrote that was divinely inspired as well.
Yeah.
So we have the fifth dimension is light. The sixth dimension, or the sixth density, combines love and light. So these are densities that we're working up to. Ra identifies itself as a sixth density being. The name Ra comes from the time when it did appear on Earth and walk among us, as they say. Helped the Egyptians. It worked with the pharaoh Akhenaten, who was the only being on Earth at that time preaching a belief in one God, one divine being, and that's how Ra connected with Akhenaten. They had a very bad experience because after they worked with Akhenaten, and before that they had constructed the Great Pyramid of Giza, they say through thought. This was not physically constructed by humans, it was constructed by thought, and it was made to look as if it were built from individual stones weighing hundreds of tons. But nonetheless, that was their claim, and that's what they say they did. And I don't disbelieve them. I don't think anybody has yet come up with a credible explanation for how a bunch of Egyptian slaves were able to construct this masterpiece of engineering called the pyramid, and why there were pyramids constructed around the same time in Central America and Mesoamerica by the Aztecs and Incas and so on. So when I don't get a satisfying explanation for something, then I stay open to alternative explanations. So I am, whoops, sorry, it's my mouse. I am open to believing what Ra has to say. And Ra also said, you know, we are servants of the one divine creator. They claim that they are part of a federation of planets in service to the one divine creator, that our galaxy, the Milky Way, and our solar system is actually being overseen by a group of higher density beings, fifth and sixth density beings, who, you know, work on a level that we can't conceive. So here's another question. If we're going to accept the possibility of ETs, and the UFOs are almost secondary, I find that almost a red herring, but the fact that there are multidimensional beings that are making contact with some of us on this planet, how do we think of them? I mean, are they physical flesh and blood beings who walk among us and conceal their identity from us? Are they spirit beings who communicate telepathically? And a lot of people who report, so-called abduction experiences, they always say that, no, this being did not speak to me. I didn't hear. I heard a voice in my head. I knew what he or she was thinking. And I was able to communicate with them. Did you speak English? Well, didn't matter because I knew what they were saying. I understood them. They understood me. And sometimes it's a scary experience. Sometimes, it's uplifting. And that's why we have to stay open because, for every credible account, there are accounts that really beggar the imagination. So if you come across a book on UFOs or ETs and you say, oh my God, I can't believe this, it's nonsense, then great, don't believe it. It's nonsense to you. But don't close your mind and keep open to the idea that you may find something that is credible. I believe that the Ra material is very credible. One of the three channels is still living. I was able to interview him. He's my age, which is to say in his 70s, and very articulate and coherent, and very selfless too. That's the interesting thing. Ken Wilber, the great American mystic, always said that true enlightenment manifests as a desire to be of service to others.
Right.
And if you know people like Ram Dass, you know how true that is. Mother Teresa, I didn't agree with her theology, but I certainly think she was someone who lived to be of service to other people. And that's how you can tell the difference between a genuinely enlightened person and a cult leader like Keith Rainier of Nexium or Yogi Bhajan of the 3HO organization, which turned out to be a huge scam, although that company makes yogi tea, which you can still buy in your local health food store. They're still fighting over the royalties for that. But anyway, I don't want to get too far off the track, but that was eye-opening for me. The idea that this entity that identified as an extraterrestrial that was communicating with human beings through channeling was yet saying that it believes in the one infinite creator and that we are all a product of this creator. So if we take the long look, and I mean really long, like hundreds of thousands of light years through the known universe, and okay, I said it's going to be non-linear, so I will jump to another mosaic tile, which is there life in the universe? Is there a reason to believe that there is sentient life elsewhere? Well, even in the Middle Ages, the Catholic Church and a lot of Catholic theologians believed that there were alien beings on other planets and other universes, and that they were created by God, and therefore they'll die and go to heaven or hell just like we will. They didn't think there was any difference between humans and so-called aliens, which was very open-minded of them, I will say, given their limitations in other areas of thought. However, they absolutely accepted it. So let's look at the universe as we know it. And fortunately, we've been the beneficiaries of some wonderful telescopes. The James Webb telescope that is out there taking pictures and allowing us to have a better look at the universe. And right now, there are said to be some 200 billion trillion habitable planets in the universe as we know it.
Wow.
That's a lot of planets. Just in our own Milky Way, there are believed to be some 40 million habitable exoplanets. Exoplanet is just a fancy word of saying a planet that's not in our solar system. It's outside of the solar system, therefore it's exo. And any sun that is similar to our sun, a G-level star that is in what's called the Goldilocks zone. I love this term, the planet that is not too close and not too far from their sun, their star, in order to be like Earth, capable of supporting life and sentient life at that. So this Goldilocks zone, 1 in 5 stars in the universe has some number of habitable planets in their habitable or Goldilocks zone.
Peter, sorry to interrupt. I just have a
Yeah.
quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
You were talking about earlier with Ra. Are you talking about the sun god Ra?
Yes,
Okay. And
that's what these people who were channeling him was the
Right.
first thing they said was, Ra was worshipped by the ancient Egyptians. Are you
Right.
saying that's you? And they said, yes.
Yes.
That was the name we were known by then. They said they actually walked among the Egyptians.
Right.
But as I started to say before, I didn't finish this thought, they had a bad experience because after Akhenaten died, although he had tried to, teach this one God belief system, the pharaohs and the other priests at the time, they didn't like this at all because it took their power away. It said, well, there's one divine being.
Right.
They wanted to be the God kings. So they reverted back to their old ways of being, and Ra took off. They said, we're out of here. They got in their spaceships or whatever, and they left. But they came back all this time later because they said they felt guilty that they had, started something that went awry. And they gave these secrets to the Egyptians. If you look at the pyramid, those inner chambers, the king's chamber and the queen's chamber, were designed to collect energy, solar energy, and to magnify it. Now, we've lost the secret of doing that in the meantime, but it's said that when those chambers were originally opened, there were devices or machinery in there that were removed.
So Peter, if I could just bring it back to today then. So
Okay.
your next project that you're doing, do you feel that raw, like will you be channeling your next book? So when you think about us on the planet and the Egyptians coming in and the sun god, and then we're inhabited on the planet, and then 2,000, 3,000 years go by, but yet Ra, the sun god, the gods of our understanding are still in us, around us. So when you do your next book about this, is it something you are channeling, or is it something that you've been journaling about for years and you're writing about, or is it a novel that's being channeled to you? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, those are all good options, but it's none of the above. I'm not a channel. I have never been able to channel. I might work with a channel. I know several really good ones. But I'm not so much interested in the experience. What I'm doing is gathering information. I'm playing my role as a scribe, gathering the information, learning as much as I can, talking to people who are involved in this field, and then making my own projection of what is credible and what's not credible, but also the things that I think people need to know.
Yes.
It may be that there is some contact coming. There is a very interesting channel named Daryl Anka, who's working with an entity called Bashar, Bashar. I know it's an Arabic name, but he's not Arabic. But he is from another galaxy, and he channels this being Bashar, who claims to also be from the future. But if you read the channeling sessions, they're incredible. They're very advanced. He talks about incarnation and reincarnation, and that reincarnation happens, but it's not a linear process. We don't go from one lifetime to the next to the next. We're actually experiencing several lifetimes at once, just as Seth said. And Seth was not an alien. Seth was someone who had lived many lifetimes on Earth and simply graduated to a non-material life. So they are, when you ask if they're still among us, can we still contact them? I would have to say at this point, I'm not aware of anyone who is able to contact them, including this gentleman I spoke with, Jim McCarty, who was one of the three original people who channeled Ra. He said that Ra, they broke the contact and said they would not channel with anyone else once their channel died, a woman named Carla Eckert. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it doesn't matter because there are other entities, there are other beings who are, and this, the reason I brought up Bashar, he says he's been trained in the art and science of first contact. He is one being who is trained to be among those making first contact with new civilizations like Earth, where, we're beyond. People are saying, well, why didn't these aliens out there, why weren't they visiting us all these years? Why weren't they landing back in the 1300s? Well, life wasn't that interesting on Earth. It wasn't until we got, actually the so-called visitations, all these UFO sightings started around in the 1940s after the first nuclear bombs had been exploded. And there's a belief that they were concerned that they don't want Earth to be, Earth is a beautiful place, and we're threatening it in two ways. First, through nuclear weapons and nuclear technology, and second, to what we're doing to the environment. And they're very outspoken on this, that they may or may not intervene to set us on the right track. Now, I don't know whether that's going to happen. I think it's unlikely that they're going to make themselves known at this stage, but these individual beings who are beaming down to us, they are making themselves known, and they're not prevented from doing that. The Federation of Planets in Service to the One Infinite Creator that I mentioned, they do oversee our area, our corner of the Milky Way, and presumably have placed Earth in quarantine, where we cannot be interfered with by negative entities. The other thing I like about Ra is they don't talk about good and evil. They talk about positive and negative polarization. Positive polarization is if you're polarized as in service to others. Negative polarization is when you're polarized in service to self. And they say that even those negatively polarized beings among us are on the path. They are not evil. They are on a path of evolution, of spiritual evolution, and they will eventually reach a level where they will no longer be able to be polarized only to self. That ultimately all positive polarization is service to others. That's what Ra are doing, and that's what Bashar is doing, and so on. So, I mean, it would be fun to sort of, have a regathering where we could go over some of these things later.
Absolutely, Peter, because one of the things that we've been teaching each other is, and one of the things that we always open up with Breakfast with Soul and Fate Destiny, is we go through the chakras, which are actually the planets. So just think about this, guys and girls, like imagine that we are meditating on each planet, but one of those planets is going to affect you and your body more than it will affect mine. Like planetary, when you think about that, like the ETs that are out there, how are they talking to you? That's why we have to know ourselves enough and our bodies enough. Where is it going to hit you? Is it going to hit you in Venus? Is it going to hit you in Mars? Maybe it might be Saturn. That's why it's so important to know yourself enough that the planets, as I tell you all the time, will always speak to you. But maybe it's not necessarily a planet. After listening to Peter, I'm realizing it's the entities, the ETs that are quote unquote in charge of that planet, that are still alive on that planet. Just because we don't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. As Peter says, we're all multidimensional and we're living in different frequencies at different times at the same time.
At the same time. It's all happening at the same time.
Yeah.
There's only one time, and that's here and now. And by the way, Ra did speak of this, of the Federation having their headquarters was on Saturn. Now, when we say on Saturn, it doesn't mean on the surface of the planet Saturn. No. Just like Earth has multiple dimensions, they also do. So they're located in one of the dimensions of Saturn. They're overseeing this corner of the Milky Way galaxy and our solar system in particular. They also, by the way, Ross gave instruction to these people about the chakras. Now, this was 1981. I'm not saying that nobody knew about chakras. Everybody in India knew about them. But in this country, Caroline hadn't even started writing about them yet. That was another 10 years away, 10 or 15 years. They also claim to have invented tarot, the Egyptian tarot. And it wasn't the tarot decks that we have today, but it was a learning system designed to help people evolve spiritually. You begin with the magician and so forth. It's very complicated, but if you're into that, you can get the transcripts of all of the Ra channeling sessions for free on that website, llresearch.org. Let me just go on, because there are a couple of other things I wanted to get to while we have time. Yeah, and one is this concept that I've been writing about on my Facebook page of panspermia. Panspermia, Greek for everywhere seeds, pan and spermia, is the concept that this life on Earth was seeded by biological life coming from other planets or other places in the universe, not to say just our solar system and not to say just the Milky Way galaxy, but they traveled. Now, there are two versions of panspermia. The first, which was actually promoted by Anaxagoras, the Greek philosopher, who said that this was happening accidentally. So as asteroids and meteoroids would travel, they would carry these microorganisms, and as they crashed into Earth and other planets, these microorganisms settled in the soup of the developing planet Earth. One figure, I wanted to avoid too many facts and figures, but as you all know, the universe is said to be 13.8 billion years old. How old is Earth? 4.5 billion. So a lot of folks out there got a big head start on us. The idea that there's nothing out in the universe, to me, that's laughable. When scientists say, oh, the idea of a God, the supreme being that runs everything, that's irrational. We believe in rational thought. So I always want to say, so rationally speaking, what existed before the Big Bang? So I get the Big Bang is infinitely dense ball of infinitely dense matter just suddenly exploded. But what was there before that ball? Was there and where did that come from? So there's no creator. It's just kind of a random event. Well, one thing that I like that Bashar says is that nothingness is impossible. In other words, non-existence by its very definition cannot exist. If you've ever tried to imagine, like, what if I didn't exist? What if I were just not there, had never been born, or my soul didn't exist? I can't do that. And I think there's a reason, because it literally can't happen. Anyway, the second version of panspermia, which was first mentioned by British astronomer Fred Hoyle. He's the guy, by the way, who invented the term Big Bang on a radio show. And then he later debunked it. He said, well, I didn't mean that I don't think the Big Bang ever happened. I was just saying that, like, this is what scientists believe, that suddenly this whole universe and all the life in it came from this ball of dead matter. That's impossible. Even Niels Bohr, the father of quantum physics, said that matter is secondary. Consciousness precedes matter. I'm sorry, it wasn't Niels Bohr. Who's the other guy? The quantum physicist. Somebody out there must know. Well, I'll come back to that later. So, directed panspermia means that beings on other galaxies or in other planets directed this material to the Earth, or they actually came to Earth. There was an episode of Star Trek, which was obviously written by somebody who was very knowledgeable scientifically. And it's on I have a link to it on my Facebook page if you want to go there and check it out, where this being who is what do you call that, is beamed down by
Transporter.
a hologram of her is transported, and she's saying that my ancestors, seeded the universe because we knew that our civilization was dying out. We wanted it to continue, so we sent this stuff out into the universe and we planted it, and some of it went on Earth. And then, of course, they have the other alien groups on Star Trek, including the Cardassians. I thought that was funny. I never realized there was a group of aliens. Long before the Kardashians, there were the Cardassians and the Klingons and so forth. Anyway, that's all science fiction, but it's remarkably close. Fred Hoyle, who wrote science fiction, claimed that he was an atheist, and yet he believed in directed panspermia. He thought that life on Earth came from other planets. And Francis Crick, who won the Nobel Prize for inventing the double helix form of DNA, he also supported this idea of directed panspermia. So this means, if it's true, that you and I, may all share in the DNA of beings from other galaxies, other universes. It's impossible to say. If we look back at Darwinian evolution, there are a lot of problems, and a lot of scientists are coming up with these problems. The one thing, again, I talked about staying open. As good, modern-minded, liberal, whatever we are, we don't believe in creationism, right? People say, oh, creationism, that's taught by people who say that the earth is only 6,000 years old and God created the universe in 6 days. Well, that's fundamentalist creationism. However, there is a lot of evidence that what we think of as Darwinian evolution, a series of infinitely slow steps taking place over millions and millions, 3.5 billion years, is not quite accurate. One thing is that what distinguishes us as humans more than anything else, it's our language. It's the fact that we have a spoken and written language. Now, you may say dolphins and whales, octopuses, they communicate with each other. They do make sound, but they don't have a language on the level of complexity of the rest of the earth, of Sanskrit and Tibetan and English and so on. Now, there's a problem with that if we say that we evolved from our bipedal primate ancestors, who include, chimpanzees, the great apes, bonobos, and so forth, and Denisovans and Neanderthals, because no primates have the ability to make speech, even though people like Jane Goodall have worked with chimpanzees and have developed sign language. They don't have the vocal capacity to make articulate speech, and they certainly don't have a written language. But our written language evolved from spoken language. So that's a very challenging question. If we really are evolved without any interference, without any genetic manipulation, then how do we explain spoken language on such a level of complexity that it almost can't be comprehended how that came from even a primate, even a bipedal primate ancestry. I don't have time to go into Noam Chomsky and all of his writings, but it looked like you have a question.
No, but Peter, no, unfortunately, I can't believe our time is almost up for today. So I'm hoping you're going to come back at some point. So what I'm understanding from you then is that your belief is, yes, evolution is part of our species, when we go back to Darwin. However, the language, where did that come from? What I'm understanding from you is that there has to be something bigger than ourselves that landed on the planet and brought us into our own evolution. Correct?
Yes. Yeah. Well, you're familiar with the writings of Zechariah Sitchin.
Yes.
That is one source, one of several. There's evidence of visitation. I would, if you want an assignment for today, pick up a copy of the Bible and read the book of Ezekiel, or just read the first chapter and try to figure out what's happening there.
Yeah.
There's a whole lengthy story behind the people who discovered that and suddenly woke up. And there was a book that came out back in 1974 called The Spaceships of Ezekiel, that was written by a NASA engineer who thought that Eric von Däniken and Chariots of the Gods was all nonsense. And von Däniken said, well, take a look at the book of Ezekiel and then tell me what you think. And this engineer read it and then reread it and then read different translations of it. And he realized that this was a description of the equivalent of a lunar lander. That this was not a mothership that was being described, but it wasn't a divine being, that this was a spaceship that was landing on Earth. And he wrote a book, and he actually he used his engineering skills to draw an image of what this ship would look like. But we don't have time to go into that.
Yeah, the whole Bible, I mean, right from the Star of the East, the whole Bible is all about astrology. If you sit down and read and dissect it properly, it's all there.
Well, it's also about what you mentioned, Lily, about the Nephilim, who were mentioned in Genesis, a word that's been translated as giants. When the sons of God looked upon the daughters of men and saw that they were fair and went into them and bore children, that there is this sense that there was some interaction between ETs and humans. I mean, that there's no definitive proof of that, but again, there's the DNA record. We have more chromosomes in our DNA than chimpanzees, which are our closest relative, that are like, 96 and 98% overlap. But there's a big gap. And that's where I say that Darwin leaves a lot to be desired.
Yeah, but we can combine.
Do we have time for questions? Does anyone have a question?
Anne had a question. Do you want to unmute? Thank you, Peter.
Sure.
Anne, you had a question?
This is really wonderful. I love this topic, and I love learning from you. I kind of had a comment from before when I read this book called Connecting with the Arcturians, and I really loved it, and it has a lot of downloads in it. But one of the things they said was that the reason why they don't appear to us physically, first of all, our vibration is lower. To be dense, to become a dense body, physical body, you have to lower your vibration.
Right.
And the other thing is that they don't look like us. So we, as people, we already have so much prejudice and fear just amongst ourselves. And then we have this thing that maybe looks like an octopus or something. That would be terrifying for most people. I mean, we're not at the point yet where we can just accept these beings, what their physicality might be. And so anyway, I just wanted to bring up that point because, I love that book, and I found just their reasoning so interesting.
Well, the aliens have addressed this issue, the fact that although, they're, like I said, this is multidimensional. There are some schools of thought who feel that we were influenced genetically by ETs, and therefore we were, that passage, the famous passage in Genesis where the Elohim, the plural gods, say, let us make man in our image and likeness. And so, that we may have been designed by a bipedal entity in another universe, but there are so many entities in the universe that, yes, there are oceanic beings. There are who might look more like squids or octopus. And they're very conscious of the fact that we're not ready for this. We're not ready for contact. They're always saying, well, why don't they land on the White House lawn? That wouldn't really work either, because, there is a chance that people would panic and start to freak out. But more than that could be a very negative experience. That's why this entity, Bashar, claims he's being trained to be a first contact specialist to help people to understand. And he doesn't appear in any physical form. That's why he channels. That's why Ra channeled, precisely the reasons you said, and that it's a different density, and it's not possible. In fact, Ra had a hard time finding a channel who they needed like a step down transformer from their level of density to be able. So they found a woman who was actually a very devout Christian who believed in God and was also a trained channeler and had been channeling for more than 10 or 15 years when Ra finally kind of latched onto her and said, we can work with this instrument. They always called her the instrument because to them it's like music, and we are musical instruments. We can play. The human voice is, again, it's so unique that we can't, the idea of it coming from, a line of primates is really inconceivable. There had to be some genetic manipulation, whether it was done from a distance or up close, we don't know. Sitchin does talk about that possibility. His work has been questioned, but I tend to believe that he may have a lot of the details wrong, but the basic concept, for instance, the idea that all over the earth there are civilizations who worship not in God in the spiritual sense, but a great teacher, someone who came down to earth and taught them how to farm, how to grow crops, specifically cereal grains that they could store in barns so they could stop being hunter-gatherers and they could then form urban civilizations, city centers with pyramids, with buildings, how they could learn a written language, not just a spoken language, so they could keep records, how they could learn mathematics, including a number system with zero, which makes higher mathematics possible. There's no evolutionary evidence for this having developed slowly over millions of years on Earth. This happened kind of all at once. It happened to the Egyptians. It happened in Sumer with the Sumerians. It happened in Mesoamerica with the Aztecs, the Maya, and in Peru with the Inca. Same thing, same kind of God figure, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent who flies out of the sky. There's just too much of this. That's why I'm saying you don't have to believe everything that you read, but there are just too many. It's kind of like near-death experiences. When people first started reporting them, it was like, oh, this is ridiculous. And they all say the same thing. Oh, yeah, they all say the same thing because they're having a very similar experience. And now, a lot of physicians and scientists are finally coming around to say that, well, yeah, near-death experiences, that's not a fluke. It's not your brain starting to die. So it has these experiences of seeing light and feeling warmth. No, it's actually happening. Now, we don't understand fully why and how it's happening, but it is happening. And I think that there's another parallel with what's happening with ETs right now.
So what I'm understanding for all of us also is to really do what we always try to do and to pay attention. Instead of pay attention, pray attention. Pay attention to the planets that are in your body. Be open to all possibilities, as Peter emphasized. There's so many different stories, but own the story that's true for you.
And meditate on it.
And meditate on it, yes.
The one thing that another reason why I really gravitated to Ra's teachings is they were always saying you need to meditate. And the channels would say, well, what form of meditation do you recommend? And they'd say, we don't recommend any particular form. Just meditate. Open your being. We may be able to contact you. Others may be able to contact you. The divine, the creator may contact you, but you need to practice meditation daily. So I do. That's my practice. And as far as religions go, they didn't attack religion. They just said that the dogma of a lot of religions was outdated, but that if it had any technique of value, for instance, I do follow a form of Tibetan Buddhism because I learned to meditate through them, and their meditation is the one that works for me. So, people say, well, Buddhism isn't really a religion. Yeah, it is. It's a religion. It is a scientifically oriented religion, but it's still, but you don't have to practice it the way our my parents practiced Catholicism. We are given free will. The one infinite creator gives us free will, and part of that free will is to reject things that we don't that don't work for us.
So again, when Peter talks about,
Wait, that book is no longer available.
oh, you can't order that? The Circle of
No, I
Belief.
said you, Circles of Belief
Of Belief.
has everything that's in that book, updated, but
Okay.
several more chapters where I brought it forward. That ends with the New Age. So in Circles of Belief, which is available on Kindle,
Right.
and hey, it's a bargain. It's like $4.95 or something, and it's still 700 pages, but it's not a print version. And I love Kindle. I love ebooks because you can search. They have searchable text. So if you type in Krishna, you'll get every reference to it in the book. So yes, you can just you can go to my website. There's a link there. You can read a lot of it for free on my website, and then if you like it, you can order it.
Thank you, Peter. And Peter, what is the
Thank you.
next book? And I know Lynn has a question. What's the name of your next book? Do you know yet?
No, it doesn't have a name. Well, there are books that I co-author, one of which just came out, which is called Essential Healing, which I wrote with a fellow who's a hypnotherapist who does life between lives hypnotherapy regressions. And this, what I'm working on now, hopefully will be Caroline has this series of, what does she call them, recollections.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm talking to her about creating an extended version of what we were doing today.
Good. Thank you.
Oh, yes, the question.
Yes, Lynn, you had a question.
Yes.
Oh, Lynn,
Well,
okay.
Yes, hello. You had
Hi, Lynn.
indicated that you would be willing to come back to talk with us. Is that like a seminar series that you could offer, like with Lilly work, to offer it to a group? Or do you do that already that we could then join in?
I don't have one that's currently going. I'd be happy to discuss with Lilly the possibility of doing that. I love working with groups. I love this group. It could be a bigger group, even, get more people in. I'm very comfortable with Zoom. I've been running Zoom meetings, not this particular kind, but other things, other Zoom meetings. A lot of my Buddhist friends do Zoom sessions, and our lamas teach by Zoom. But I would love to be able to continue to explore this. There's so much stuff here, and we could make it a set time and see if it's feasible, economically and so forth. But yeah, that would be fun. I would be very open to that.
Thank you, Peter. That's great
Thank
news.
And Louise, you have a question.
Just on your book of Circles of Belief, I would love to have the paper book. Call me old fashioned, but there's just something in being able to receive that and then to dive into it that I prefer. Can I order that through your website or through?
Well, you're challenging me to do the next step, which is to have the paper book created. They will create a paperback. I was a little hesitant because it's huge. The original book was 650 pages, and now it's longer, so it would be like 700 and some odd pages. But it can be done. So, Louise, you're making me think. And well, the one thing that's good about print on demand is that they will print one copy. And they charge the same as if you buy 100 copies. It's the same per book price. So I'll look into that and see. But I have a question for you. How do you say your last name, Louise?
Beaulieu, which means beautiful place.
Yes, I know. I studied French in high school. I left French, and you say it so beautifully. Beaulieu. Okay, thank you.
Thank you for today.
Thank you
so
all.
great to read your books. It's all the things that since I was 15, there are all the different religions of the world and all those beliefs that just to have it all put together so eloquently. I'm looking forward to reading it.
Well, for $5, I think it's a good investment. You can, because of the searchable text aspect of it, because when you get a print book, and I love print books, I ran out of space for them. That's why now I buy a lot of audiobooks and ebooks because I don't have any more bookshelf space. But, where they have the index in the back, and you go to the index and it has all these page numbers. But with an ebook, you just type in the word you're looking for, and a whole column shows up on the left, and it's like every instance of that word in the book, if it's 100 times or just one time, and you can just click and go. So I'm kind of spoiled by the digital age. Although, as I say, I love print books and I owe my life to them.
It would be good actually for all of us maybe to download Circle of Beliefs. And then when Peter comes back, we have an eye's view of what it is that we're going, the material.
Well, this material is not in there, but here's another good thing about ebooks.
Yeah.
If you buy the ebook, I am able to constantly revise it. Like even last year when they were having the Democratic, what do you call it, the debates, and excuse me, Marianne Williamson was on. I entered a whole section about her and how interesting it was that she was now getting all this media coverage, that people poo-pooed the New Age, and yet here's a New Age character running for president. I mean, she didn't. I was disappointed that she wasn't able to continue on. But my point is that if you buy the book and then I add this next chapter, which would be on this material, you are entitled to re-download it for free. In other words, you paid for it, so you get the updated version at any time that comes out. And I make that part of the deal with Amazon.
Good. Thank you. Any other questions before we get ready to close off? Any comments? So Peter will join us again. We're really happy.
Yeah, let me just say, this was a great fun for me. I really appreciate your openness in coming out and listening to me ramble on in my mosaic fashion about this material, because it doesn't, knowing it is one thing, but sharing it with people, that's what I'm here for. That's what I was doing up in those monasteries all those centuries ago, copying manuscripts and getting them out to the world. So I'm doing the same thing in slightly different format. And digital is easier than manual.
What house did your scribe show up in?
Oh, I forget. Let's try this.
I wonder if it's your.
He has to think about it.
Well, yeah, he has to think about it.
Well, we go through these stages. Yes, I have my chart somewhere.
Yeah, we have to get him into one of our classes. Actually, that'd be great when we do the next. This group, most of the people in this group, we've spent a year going through each house with each of their archetypes. It took us a year. And
that's great.
And my goodness, we learned a lot from each other. So now in September, we're going to go into the charism chart. So that'll even be more interesting. Yeah. So we'll have to have you join us in one of the houses. So thank you so much for being here, Peter. The information is just the tip of the iceberg. I want to get underneath the iceberg and find out all this other stuff. So
yes, there's an iceberg in Antarctica, and there are supposedly old bases under there.
Yeah, so I want to get to the base of your work. Like there's so much information that we haven't even tapped into yet. So we'll have you back again. We're so grateful that you're here. And keep doing what you're doing and keep inspiring us to believe in something bigger than ourselves, that there is something more than us, and to continue, all of us, to keep going through the planets, through the body. Let the body speak to you through the planets. And that way, whether it's Ray or whether it's whatever energy comes to you, pay attention.
I like that. Thank you. Thank you, Lily.
Peter. I love you, sweetheart. Thanks for saying yes.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Merci.
You're welcome, Sylvie. Thank you for being here, love.
Merci bien.
Okay, everybody. I love you. Have a good day.
Thank you so much.
I am just going to